Welcome to HRNK. Welcome to our new report rollout. This is a report on one of North Korea's detention facilities, one of North Korea's political prison camps, prison camp number 18, as our presenter, Joe Bermudez, senior satellite imagery analyst, will explain, as our discussant, Raymond Ha, HRNK Director of Operations and Research, will explain. This is the one facility that is not run by the Ministry of State Security, by the POIBU. This is the only facility that's run by the Ministry of Social Security, the, well, political police, not the Gestapo, if you will. This report has been in the works for many years. Let me begin by saying that together with Raymond, all of our HRNK staff members, board members, report authors, consultants, research interns, we are deeply grateful to Joe Bermudez for everything that he has done for this organization and this mission for so many years. I'm going to tell the story again, Joe. You called me as soon as I joined in 2011, 13 years ago, hard to believe, and said, Greg, how can I help? What can we do together? And I'm not going to steal your thunder. I am going to ask you to tell us a few words about why you are so invested. Everybody knows you in this field of, Korean Peninsula security issues, but you have a very special mission, very personal to you. You have a great family history of addressing human rights, humanitarian law issues. So we're very grateful to you, Joe. We are also very grateful to our colleagues at NGA, the National Geospatial Intelligence Agency. We are part of a partnership under the Tailline program. Joe, you're the expert, to run this, but we do have very good imagery access. Again, this is an open source partnership. We are not the only organization in Washington, D.C. that has this type of partnership with NGA. It's allowed in the open. I think it's a great example of a government agency working with a civil society organization. I think this is U.S. taxpayers' money at work. I can think of no better mission than working on bringing human rights, freedom, democracy, prosperity to all Koreans, in particular to Koreans living on the northern half of the Korean Peninsula. Joe, I am going to turn it over to you. I will introduce you very briefly. Joe Bermudez is one of the world's top satellite imagery experts. Joe is HRNK's senior satellite imagery analyst. Again, he's done such great work for so many years. Very grateful once again. So, Joe, may I ask you to begin by saying a few words about our satellite imagery project? And then I'll ask you to dive right into Camp 18, the topic of today's conversation.
Certainly. As Greg had mentioned many years ago, when he first joined, we connected, and I mentioned to him some of the benefits that could be derived by using satellite imagery. With the information on North Korea becoming harder and harder to obtain, and we got tidbits of these political detention facilities. And at that point, we started a long-term project to cover these political camps and to build up a body of knowledge that can be used in the future to bring those who have overseen human rights abuses against the people of North Korea. And gradually, over time, we've built up a considerable base of knowledge. It unfortunately has big gaps in it, which is natural for a country like North Korea. But we go and we fill in, as we get more information, we fill in, we update, we correct. And this is a long-term project. This is what's needed. It's not just one report. It's a body of work, and it's specialized in using satellite imagery, in which we can also bring in the escapee information, the classified information, and a whole body of miscellaneous information. It's been a challenge. It's been exciting, been frustrating also, but we believe we're making progress. And we hope that someday when North Korea becomes a democracy, that those who are accountable for causing the human rights abuses will be brought to justice, and that our body of work could somehow provide a base for those who are taking care of the prosecution. Would you like me to jump in, Greg?
Yes, Joe, thank you very much. So you've made a few extraordinarily important points. Accountability is one of them. We love our colleagues in the press corps. They always want a big scoop, a big story. This is not what this project has been about, has it? It's about what you've done, putting together the baseline assessments, updating the baseline assessments. Every now and then we have an amazing story that makes the news, but it's, a constant grinding effort aimed at preparing for accountability, documentation and accountability at a later stage. So thank you for doing that. And Joe, if you want to dive into Camp 18, I think we're ready.
Okay. First off, before I really start, there are a number of people that really made this project possible. And while Greg, builds me up as this great person, this report could not have been done without his and obviously Raymond's assistance, but also all the interns over the past couple of years. And also, consultants like Jacob Bogle. These are the people that provide the foundation upon which we built this report. They deserve a great deal of credit. I want to thank them personally. As I move into the discussion here, open source information on North Korea has become incredibly difficult to obtain, no matter what subject you're talking about. It's become even harder since Kim Jong-un has come to power. The information that does come to light is often internally inconsistent. In one part of a report, it says one thing, but another part of the report, it contradicts it. It's often fragmentary. Just a small tidbit here, a small tidbit there. It's based heavily upon escapees. However, these escapees have been severely traumatized. Anybody who's been traumatized by war or isolation or brutality has challenges in remembering the details that are often essential for building up a case. They remember certain highlights. They don't remember all the details. I've interviewed former escapees who they would say they would have to walk 15 minutes from their housing, but they couldn't remember in which direction. So I'd say, okay, walk, I'll bring up a satellite image. I say, okay, you tell me this is where you were housed. And they'll think about it and they generally agree. And then I say, okay, when you walked out the door, did you go to your left or your right? And then I walk them through saying left or right, how long did you walk? And gradually we get to a location which they want to discuss. Sometimes it matches what we see in satellite imagery, sometimes it doesn't. It's always a challenge. The other thing is these detainees, former detainees, were only at a camp for a specific time span. Sometimes that's very long, but it's very specific. So we get these slices of time and we try to stitch them together. We also have to be aware that many of them are not technically savvy, and not geographically savvy. So they'll tell us accounts of their experiences, and you have to be careful that they don't go beyond what they actually know. A lot of it's just limited to line of sight. Some of these people spend years just walking maybe 100, 200 meters and back. So telling me about something that happens on the other side about, 4 miles away is always a challenge, and you have to keep it in mind, but you have to put it in its proper context. I also want to caution everybody that satellite imagery is only one tool in a large toolbox of intelligence collection or information gathering. Okay? It doesn't have all the answers by any means. And the quality information you derive from it is based upon the experience of the analyst and their expertise in doing the craft. By experience, I not only mean doing the craft, but world experience. Have they ever worked on a railroad, a chemical plant? Have they ever been in a mine? Things of that nature helps with the analysis. There's no real history available on the establishment of these camps. And that's why some of the satellite imagery, most of which commercial satellite imagery started in the United States, about 1999. I mean, high resolution. Before that, there was moderate or low resolution, but high resolution started about 1999. Often we can't go back that far. We go back to 2002, 2004. And that's the case with Camp 18. But there's declassified imagery that can take us from the 1960s all the way up to the mid-1980s. So there's that gap from the mid-80s to 2000, let's say. And we're trying to, bridge that gap, but it can often be challenging. So let me bring up Google Earth so I can show you some things that we've identified and things that we'd like to share. And I will share my screen if you'll just give me a minute. So when we, here's the camp, okay? Here's what it looks like. This is the outline that I and others have identified as being the perimeter of Camp 18. Camp 14 is just above it here. This is a large area. It's 71 square kilometers. To give you an idea, if you went out and walked 5 miles in one direction, then turned right and walked 5 miles in 90 degrees from that. And then once again, you turn right and go 5 miles and 5 miles, like 25 square miles. That's how large this is. This is larger than most detention facilities in the world. Okay? And half of it is mountainous, as you can see down here and up here. This fertile area is very important and is dedicated to agriculture, intensive agriculture. So when we take all our notes, and once again, I want to thank the interns and consultants like Jacob for helping assemble this. This is what it looks like. These are all locations that have been identified by detainees, interns, consultants, myself. And this is a project that is many years old. Okay? Well, I'm not going to discuss all this by any means, but to give you an idea how it looks when we start looking at it. And then we go from place to place. We identify areas that we think would be of value to explain to people the nature of the camp and its status. So I'm going to turn this all off again and give you some of the challenges we face. This location in the northwest corner of the camp is described by a number of people, escapees too, as a distillery. Well, I don't know too many distilleries that have solid walls around them. You can see it here. I apologize for the thunder because it's thunder and lightning here. Has guard posts on the corners. And it doesn't, a distillery normally has vats or tanks. I see none of those here. I see no shipping and receiving for grains. This looks more like a component or a small subcomponent of the camp that is a detention facility of some sort. Okay. So how do we rate this? Well, we decided to say that it is a probable detention facility or guard facility, and that it might handle several guard positions along the water. We really can't see them very well because of the trees. And I'll give you just a quick, there is a facility right along the water here. You can just barely make it out in this poor image, and you can see the road that travels along the river. You know, this is where additional imagery would be extremely helpful. So let's leave that one and go to this little village in the northeast corner. And this gives you an idea of what's happened over time. This whole area, as is common in North Korea, is called Sangri. Okay, down here, all the way out to here, even down to here sometimes. You know, as an American or, you know, European, we want a town to be a town, a village to be a village. We don't want an area to be the name. But in North Korea, small groups of villages are often called by the same name. So if we look here in 2013, we see a village, and it's responsible, we can tell from not only former escapees, but just from practical, you know, looking at it and understanding agriculture. I have worked on a farm, and we see that it's taking care of these fields. And we know that around 2000, was it 6 or 2008? I believe it's 2006, that North Korea announced that they were going to close the camp. So we look at it, here's 2013. This village is still active. The fields are being tended very nicely. There is a little facility here that takes care of the grain that's harvested and, you know, separates the wheat from the chaff, or the rice from the stalks. Here's 2013. I go forward. 2016, you can see the village. There, nothing remains. Right, it's all torn down. So, you know, this village still existed after North Korea said it was going to disestablish the camp, and it was here until 2013. That's 7 years afterwards. It was only between 2013 and 2016 that this village happened to be raised. Another thing that's curious about this whole situation are the guard positions. So here we see a guard position. We can see the trail that is patrolled. It's not really good enough for a vehicle. I imagine you could probably get a Jeep down here, probably not in many cases. But this is typical of a guard position. Now, if we go over time, let's go back. Okay, this is 2011. Okay, this is 5 years after they said the camp was being disestablished. Yet here in 2013, oops, I went the wrong way. Here in this 2013, we see a camp has been established. There's a trail leading from here to the perimeter. And let me just go one more, and we get a better view of the trail. See this? This was established after the camp was supposed to be disestablished. Another example of this is this remote, we're going to call it a guard position for now. This is what it looked like in 2013. Okay, this is 7 years after the camp was supposed to have been disestablished. Okay, let me go forward 1 year. Look at this building being built. Okay, several things that struck me immediately was this form, this layout is similar to what we've seen in other camps that other escapees have identified as a guard position with cells within it for a different class of prisoner. Go forward a little more. Look at the wall. Okay, guard position right at the front gate. Guard position in the back area. We can see what appears to be a propaganda billboard, for lack of a better term. And let me just zoom out a bit. I'm sorry that the imagery, but let me switch out of this. And let me add the perimeter back in. There's nothing else around here. why would you build a facility of this size, shape in such a remote area? You're not foresting the land, you're not logging it. Okay, there's no real significant agricultural fields that you need a large population in. This is most likely a guard position. Once again, built after the camp was supposed to be disestablished. If you can hear the thunder and lightning, I apologize. Let's look at this coal depot. So one of the things that many of the escapees have talked about is that they're used for coal mining, often under some really horrendous conditions. This is what I would, typically say is a coal loading facility. I've worked on railroads also. Okay, you can see the coal's brought in, it's dumped, and it's brought over here, it's put into the rail cars and taken out. And there's a fair number of cars on this terminal. This is normal. Okay, so the mines are being worked in 2013. This is, once again, years after it was supposed to be, the camp was supposed to be abandoned. Okay, let's go forward. Let's go to latest image. Okay. Once again, we see full rail cars here. These are full. Okay, about the same number in the previous image from many years prior. We see that the coal piles have changed. There's not as much, but it's still very active. Okay. There are changes into the elevator. So this is the village of Suwon. The area is actually called Suwon. Here's what it looked like in 2013. Okay, it hadn't changed very much from 2006. However, as we move forward to 2016, you can see all the housing units that have been raised. And I give credit to Jacob Bogle, who actually counted all of these. Excellent work. So they did do a lot of work. They did demolish large sections of the facility. Okay. There are some strange things that former detainees mentioned. So I want you to look at these two buildings and this building over here. So this building has a large dirt berm. So I'll just go back to Suwon because I obviously missed that. Okay, so here's the little village. Actually, the area is called Suwon. But you see all these, housing units. Okay, sorry. And if we go, this is 2013. If we go forward to 2016, you can see they're all, right, or almost all of them are raised. Okay, so the North Koreans did raise large sections. They just didn't raise everything. And they did not establish it as a detention facility. So let me go to this, what is nominally called an explosive storage. So there are lots of mines around here. And if you ever do mining, you need explosives, typically a form of dynamite. So here we see two buildings that are surrounded by a high dirt wall. And there's a large, berm between them. This is the typical pattern of explosive storage that we do see in North Korea, mining areas, and also detention facilities that are involved in mining. They also claim, some detainees claim that this is. I have challenges believing that that is correct, explosive storage here, because if it did explode, which happens frequently at poorly maintained explosive storages, it would blow out and take out most of this and potentially cause a sympathetic explosion here. Maybe, maybe not. But so when we get information, we have to look at it objectively and question it. Okay? One of the odder things is this little bridge. This looks like, a typical bridge, possibly being used also as a dam somewhat. Probably not, but you can see the road goes clearly across, comes out here. This is quite normal. However, if we go forward in time, we see it's underwater. And it remains that way. Typically what happens here is that during spring and summer, right, the water rises with the snow melt, okay? But in summer and fall, it goes down. So they can then use it to cross. And once again, I just want to show you the depth of information that we have, we work with to start with. You know, we do try to describe as much of this as possible in detail. And I encourage that you actually look at the report. This is important that you do. This is all the information we have. Actually, there's a little more, you know, but you know, here's some of the detail. You know, here, 2 buildings were raised around 2015. Okay? 2 different sources talk about this facility. Okay? You know, here's a guard position, you know, 2 different sources discuss that. There's a discrepancy as to over how this perimeter wall works. Okay, so this is us taking all this information, quite varied, and bringing it together and trying to build a story, a narrative, a factual narrative. You know, for example, one of the great things about satellite imagery is it's objective truth. Okay, so if we go back, there's a building there. That's a fact. Okay, you go today, that building's no, well, the foundation's there, but the building isn't there. This is a fact. And when we bring all these facts, and you know, the fact that, you know, this one area was raised, I can't find it now. Too many dots here, but yeah, this area. Okay. Remember when I showed you all those buildings? That's a fact. Those buildings are there. We can count them. And we can go now and say they're not there. These are the kind of facts that will become important. Why are they important? Well, when we bring together the detainees' conversations with us, and they tell such and such happened, they don't know when it happened, but it was before this village was raised. Okay, so we narrow down the timeline. Oh, it was after this was built. Okay, we've narrowed down the timeline even more. And this helps us, because if we find out that a certain individual was in charge in the camp, or there was a you know, political officer there that was, you know, raping and beating women, okay, and he was there at between such and such a date, so we can narrow it down, and we can find people who were there who could help testify against this individual. I'm open to questions if anybody has any questions, and I'll leave it off there. Is that good enough, Greg, or would you like me to go into greater detail?
For now, this is great, Joe. Thank you very much. I think this is terrific. I'm going to turn it over to Raymond, who's already beginning to talk about, well, trends we have identified based on satellite imagery, escapee testimony, open source information sources inside the country. We identified some trends under the Kim Jong-un regime since he took over the country in December of 2011. And we have also continued to look at these trends under COVID, because the situation is drastically different right now. Goodness, Putin meeting Kim Jong-un in Pyongyang, and so many things happening. So Raymond, let's go back to you. Please go ahead.
Okay, thank you. So as you may know already, this April, the UN Human Rights Council's annual resolution on North Korean human rights included a request to, quote, the High Commissioner to submit a comprehensive report containing an update on the situation of human rights in the DPRK since 2014, when the report of the Commission of Inquiry, also known as the COI, was published. It has now been 10 years since the COI released their final report, and close to 13 years, as Greg just mentioned, since Kim Jong-un assumed power. So I will address 2 questions primarily today. One, what do we know about the human rights situation in North Korea since the COI released its report? And in the second part, I'll address how do we know what we know. Joe began to go into some of this. but I'll also provide a little more context. So beginning with what do we know? So I will mention some trends that HRNK has identified under Kim Jong-un. You'll find the full list at the end of the Camp 18 report, but I'll highlight a few that are closely related to our present report today. The first one is that there has been a continued restructuring of the political prison camp system. It's important to keep in mind, I believe, Joe, you mentioned this quite often, that these facilities are not static. They change according to presumably the political objectives of the regime. Perhaps one of the best known examples is the deactivation of Kwan-Li-So number 22 near Huiryeong in 2012, close to the border with China. As you can see in our present report, there has been razing of old buildings and the construction of new buildings at Camp 18. Another thing that we have found is that we have noticed high security internal compounds within the prison camps. For instance, we have identified one at Camp 25 near Cheongjin that has been in place and continues to be in operation since at least 2010. The second trend, also related, is that there has been an aggressive purge of senior officials and party cadre by Kim Jong-un to consolidate power. And the resulting purges, based on what we know about North Korea, have likely led to the imprisonment of the purged officials' associates and their family members in political prison camps. And this could potentially explain the appearance of these new internal high security compounds, which may be used for quote unquote high value prisoners. The third important trend is that the political prison camps have continued to retain their economic importance. You'll see in the Camp 18 report, there are references to active mines and also light industry factories. And you also see these in North Korea's other political prison camps. It's worth noting in this context that just last month, the North Korean state media discussed reportedly about how coal production was, quote, patriotic. And this is an ominous statement considering the findings in this report about the continued operation of coal mines inside Camp 18. The last one I will highlight is the increased focus by the Kim Jong-un regime on eliminating what it calls anti-reactionary ideology and influence. These efforts have notably further intensified under COVID. You have laws such as the Anti-Reactionary Thought Law, the Youth Education Act, and the Language Protection Act, which are all aimed at countering the influence of foreign media, especially information from South Korea. So in short, we have found that what the COI called grave, systematic, and widespread human rights violations, often amounting to crimes against humanity, have continued under Kim Jong-un. Now to the second part, how do we know what we know? As you are no doubt aware, North Korea is an extremely difficult environment for human rights investigation and documentation. North Korea continues to deny the existence of these political prison camps, which exist on the ground in satellite imagery. We do not have on-site access. There's nothing resembling a free and independent press, and there's no civil society inside North Korea. So what do we work with? Where do we get our information? First and foremost, it is worth stressing that our research and the work of our colleagues and partner organizations that work on North Korea would not be possible without these KP testimonies. So whenever we obtain these testimonies, whenever we can, we work with partners to see if there are any notable omissions or inconsistencies in each testimony. And the reason I say this is that, one, we want to be rigorous, but we also need to keep in mind that we are dealing with people who are volunteering information about horrific things we have experienced. So we need to be mindful of both objectives here. And whenever we obtain testimony, we also compare the testimony to the body of testimony that we have accumulated over the years, as well as reports and work by colleagues at other CSOs who work on North Korea. So that's one of our main sources of information. The second is open source information, which Joe also referred to. And this is information from outlets that obtain information from anonymous sources inside North Korea, outlets such as Daily NK, Radio Free Asia, and Rimjingang. But despite their efforts, the information they're able to obtain is extremely limited compared to other country contexts. A third source of information is that sometimes, and this is not often, but sometimes we can get information from our contacts in the escapee community who can in turn directly or indirectly talk to individuals inside North Korea and in third countries. And last but not least, the focus of today's report, satellite imagery. What does this bring to the table? To provide a little context, HRNK's use of satellite imagery began in the first Hidden Gulag report with David Hawk in 2003. But the use and analysis of satellite imagery has greatly increased in coverage, depth, and sophistication thanks to Joe's expertise. Now, what is the significance of this methodology? The first is that we can use satellite image by itself to identify new facilities, even in the absence of direct witness testimony. This has been possible in at least one instance, what Joe termed the Chomabong restricted area, which is located just west of Camp 14 in a report published in 2016. But more often, in addition to satellite imagery, we can combine and cross-check this information with escapee testimony and other open source information. And what this enables is that we are able to provide objective data and add scientific rigor about documenting ongoing human rights violations in North Korea when other means are not readily available. To put it differently, satellite imagery enables us to check if, quote unquote, facts on the ground are consistent with what escapees have reported and whether their testimony is plausible given what we see in the imagery. And another key advantage worth noting is that once a facility has been identified as a political prison camp using escapee testimony, we can assess and report subsequent changes at the facility, even in the absence of more recent testimony. And we can verify if the facility appears to be still operating as a political prison camp. This latest report on Kwan-Li-So number 18 is part of a larger ongoing effort by HRNK to assess the human rights situation in North Korea, as difficult as it may be. The objective of this particular report and our other satellite image reports is to leave objective information in the public record so that no one can later deny the existence or the operation of the Kwan-Li-So political prison camps. As Joe stressed once again, we hope that our reports, including this latest one on Kwan-Li-So number 18, will inform and support future efforts to ensure accountability and transitional justice for the people of North Korea when the time comes. Thank you. And with that, I'll turn it back to you, Greg.
Well, thank you very much, Raymond. As is identified in the report, Camp 18 was the detention facility where people imprisoned in a massive purge in the late 1990s were held. We've had a very important witness who's now in the United States. Our board member, Tom Barker, has joined this meeting. Tom and I, especially Tom, have been working on helping out this very important witness, and things turned out very well. So this was a purge meant to shift responsibility for the Konane Hengun, for the Great Famine of the 1990s. This is a purge meant to eliminate the support base of Kim Il-sung and consolidate Kim Jong-il's grip on power. This was run by what is now known as of course, the Ministry of Social Security. Again, a very important location. This is the first report published by HRNK on this particular location. As Joe said, we do need to keep following developments at this facility. Thank you, Raymond, and thank you, Joe. Joe, you have questions from Albert. One question I got from Albert is, you showed what you thought was probably a guard post that appeared to be in the middle of a forest. Albert wonders, what sense does it make for North Korea to have a guard post in a forest?
That's a great question. If you look at the whole, if you look at the perimeter road, or trail, I should say, and you look at where the guard positions are located. You see that there's an easy walking distance between the guard posts, okay? And they're on, let's say, easy routes of exit, okay? If you've ever been in true wilderness, and I taught survival many years ago, human beings follow a natural path of least resistance, okay? And if you're trying to keep people in, trying to keep people from escaping, they will normally travel along the path of least resistance. And that's where these positions are placed. Either they're placed within the path or above the path. And that's where these posts are. And the one that I showed isn't the only one, by the way.
Well, thank you very much. That's terrific. And Joe, Albert is on a roll.
Okay, Albert, go.
You showed us multiple buildings that have been razed.
Mhm.
Albert thinks that contrary to popular belief, the regime within its own world is rational. I think we all understand and agree that within the strange world of the Kim family regime, this is somehow a rational actor executing its fundamental strategic objectives. Albert's question is, okay, this regime is short on resources. Does it make sense to raise buildings that might have a productive value? Why are they doing this?
Once again, a good question. And we don't know all the details and all the reasoning or the thought process behind it. But from what little we know is that people who were using this housing were shifted somewhere else. Okay? The housing itself has certain materials that you can reuse. North Koreans, whether they be former detainees at prisons facilities or just people who have left North Korea, have talked about taking, once they leave a housing unit, that the housing unit is broken down and components are taken away to be reused. So this is part of what we're seeing. Where these people went, we don't have enough information at this time. I wish I did. I wish I could tell the story from beginning to end, but at this point, we just don't know where they came from and where they went.
Thank you, Joe. And our next question will come from our board member, Tom Barker. Tom, we're going to unmute you. If you want to come on live, that'd be great. If you can be on camera, fantastic. If not, just audio. But Raymond, let's go ahead and unmute Tom. Please go ahead, Tom.
Thanks, Greg. Thanks, Raymond. I'm not sure how I can get myself on camera. So I'll just ask the question. So I've only had a chance to skim the report. I have not read it, but thank you, Raymond, and thank you, Joe. It's very, very impressive work. And I apologize if I missed this, but can we read anything into the fact that Camp 18 is not run by the Ministry of State Security, but instead it seems like it's run by the Ministry of Social Security? And can we read anything into that?
Greg, you want to take this one?
Yeah, sure. I'll take this one. Tom, this is proof that the repressive apparatus of North Korea is terrible all over the board. Of course, we refer to the POIBU, formerly known as the State Security Department, the Ministry of State Security, as the North Korean Gestapo or Stasi. These are the people who run all of the other camps. That said, the Ministry of Social Security, also MSS, is bad. They run their own prison camp, Camp 18. This is a political police that executes political police functions. Remember, they also run the shorter term detention facilities. And a couple of years ago, we published a report. Joe provided some very important satellite imagery expertise and all kinds of expertise to an inquiry that we ran together with the International Bar Association of the IBA and with Deborah Boyce Plimpton. We looked at short-term detention facilities. the Chikyoso detention facilities, the Nodong Talyonde mobile labor brigades. If a facility is short-term, it doesn't mean that things are better. Actually, some of the worst human rights violations, including terrible things such as extreme sexual violence, infanticide, forced abortions, these happen at these short-term detention facilities, and they are run by the cops. They're run by the same people who are running Camp 18. So both the Ministry of Social Security that runs Camp 18 and the Ministry of State Security that runs all other political prison camps are culpable and liable for crimes against humanity. That's a great question, Tom. This effort is all about collecting the evidence we will need as part of a transitional justice process, as part of bringing justice and human rights to the people of North Korea. Thank you. Well, Joe, Albert strikes again. Albert, you've addressed this, both you and Raymond. Albert would like you to talk, Joe, about how we acquire satellite imagery and the hurdles that we face as we acquire satellite imagery. He's also asking if we have a wish list, images that we would still like to acquire. On to you, Joe.
That's a wide open question. Well, for this particular report, we had engaged with NGA. They have a program called Tearline, in which they provide imagery to organizations or researchers who are doing work around the world. We just happen to be focused on North Korea human rights. And if you can prove that you are a reputable organization or a reputable program, they will allow you limited access to the commercial satellite imagery that they purchase for their own use. And that's how we acquired the imagery for this report. Aside from this, over the years, we have purchased large amounts of imagery from commercial vendors and used that in our reports. Typically, these are Airbus or Maxar. And we've also acquired declassified satellite imagery from the 1960s to the mid-80s at the National Archives. If I had a wish list, I would wish that NGA and CIA declassify some of the imagery from the 1990s. That would go a long way to filling out our story and understanding of the establishment of the detention facilities. We know from declassified information and from reports from former officials around the world that a lot of the camps were established in the 50s, 60s, 70s, and 80s, and then have vanished. Okay? Some of the camps that we see today have existed back in those days. So it'd be nice to be able to trace it through. And if we could trace the actual history or the physical components of the camp over time, we can then associate it with what we know of political environment at those periods. So if there was a purge at a certain period of time, we can then show how it affected the camps, and they can support each other. So that would be my great request, declassification and greater funding so we could purchase more imagery. That's always nice. You can never have enough imagery as an imagery analyst.
Thank you, Joe. We need both. That's terrific. Joe, Alina Nosel has a question. Can satellite imagery give us any indication of detainee movement or changes in the population size within the Kwan-Li-So, within the political prison camps?
It can under very certain circumstances. The number of buildings. I was asked the question when we did a report on camp number 25, and there was a public estimate of a number of detainees. And when I looked at the number of buildings, I said, that seems way too high. And then the individual came back to me and said, well, how are you basing that decision? I said, well, I took I measured the dimensions of the building and the number of floors. So that gives me square footage. Then I took an image that the North Koreans had released of what a barracks looks like. Okay, in military barracks, you tend to, really stuff people in. Okay, and I had a general idea what this barrack was. I measured its dimensions. And then I took former detainee information about the number of people they squeeze into an area about that size. And then I deducted for staircases, for bathroom equipment, washing equipment, for housing, food, because they have their own little areas to eat in. And there's always typically according to former detainees, a first aid section. And then there's, this stove, and that takes up an area. And I deducted all this. And, I came up with a figure that this could house between, I can't even know, 1,000, 2,000 people, not 20,000 people. Yeah, so it takes time. The other thing is you can see patterns of life. It's challenging because the amount of imagery that is publicly available doesn't cover every single day. And it's normally collected during midday when there's most light. That's starting to change, but you can actually see movement in the fields, and you can see how many fields are being tilled or how many orchards are being tended. And that can give you some vague idea, but you really can't get more precise than that with current imagery that's available.
Yeah, so we have a question. We'll go to Jacob first, and then we'll go to Ryan Rohrbach. So Jacob has a question about the monuments at the camp. So inside the admin center of the camp, there used to be a number of monuments. They were there in 2013, but they had already been removed by 2016. What do you think this could tell us about the camp's current administration or the position within the wider prison camp system, the monuments being taken away?
That's challenging, but we've seen this happen elsewhere in North Korea. A lot of it happens to do with what the monument said and why it was there, and the political dynamics of the senior leadership. We always assume that, a monument we see in satellite imagery is praising Kim Jong-un or Kim Il-sung. That isn't always true. It could be for some individual who did something remarkable for a past leadership, or it could be a monument to an organization and, praising an organization that was there in a particular location that is no longer there. And the monument is removed, sometimes moved to a different location. Without greater detail, greater knowledge, on the ground knowledge, it's really tough to say. Generally you can say because political reasons, but that isn't the kind of question that Jacob would normally ask. He's looking for greater detail, and unfortunately, I can't give you all that detail. Sorry.
Thank you, Joe. For quite a few years now, you have identified special holding areas that seem to be reserved. Of course, as you said, it's very important to have the human as well, and not only the satellite intelligence. But these areas seem to be reserved to, well, special prisoners. So Ryan is asking this question. You said that these areas might be dedicated to special prisoners. What type of prisoners would be considered special? Would they belong to the category of purged officials that Raymond mentioned?
The general answer to that is yes. Typically, it is to former senior leadership. Leadership that annoyed the senior leadership, but not enough to have them killed. There are numerous examples in North Korea where an official was charged with some task. I don't know, increasing production at a winery, and failed at it. And they and their family were sent to a prison, a detention facility, not a prison, but a detention facility. And subsequently, through their repeated contrition and letter writing, another senior leadership, maybe, Kim Il-sung sent them there, Kim Jong-il brought them back. Things like this happen, not terribly frequently, but they do happen. And we have other examples of facilities within facilities. Let me just share my screen very briefly. This is Camp 25 in the northeast part of the country. Small camp, unique in its size and configuration. What you're seeing is the outline of the perimeter. You're seeing all the guard positions in red. This is the primary camp right in here. In fact, it's this square. This out here is a light industry, and so are these here. Here's the housing for the detainees, and probably this too. So see the wall, if I take everything off, you can see that they're guard posts. You can actually see the shadow here of the tower. Another one here, and you can see them all around, okay? Yet, we come out here, these are the orchards. In this part of the camp, you can see the distinct wall and guard position. We see this walled compound with guard positions, okay? And numerous guard positions around it. Let me turn them on again. Okay, guard position here, 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 here. You don't put that many guard positions around a walled compound unless somebody very important is there. Okay, this is a case, and if you look closely, you can see the wall, but if you look carefully, you can see these little dots, and you can look down here, and you can just begin to see that those dots are actually poles, okay, above the wall. And the odds are, and if I had a high resolution image, I could actually show you the barbed wire that's on them. So to have that high of a wall, that many guard positions with barbed wire on top of the wall indicates that there is somebody very special there. Why? We don't know. I don't know. But it's very common. And I will stop sharing and give it back to you. Sorry.
Well, thank you very much, Joe. Again, the imagery analysis that you've been so thoroughly doing for so many years does align with these trends that we've identified and Raymond mentioned. Again, we need more imagery, more resources, more witnesses. That will continue to be our challenge. Let me thank you, Joe, for your very dedicated service. You didn't say this, I will say it. Your father liberated some of the death camps in World War II. So this is in your family. This runs very deep. This is a multi-generational dedication to human rights and justice, and we thank you very much. Raymond, thank you for your terrific work on this report, so many other reports, and so many other critical tasks that our organization performs. Again, the report is available on hrnk.org together with all other HRNK reports. Joe, Raymond, thank you very much. We look forward to our next satellite image report. Have a wonderful rest of the afternoon. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone. Have a good evening.